We spend our entire lives running on a treadmill of external desires. We chase wealth, status, and sensory pleasures. Yet, even when we catch them, that feeling of permanent, unshakable rest always seems to slip through our fingers. The Bhagavad Gita diagnoses this human condition clearly. Our consciousness is constantly pulled outward by two opposing forces: desire for what we want and aversion to what we hate. Like wild horses pulling a chariot into a battlefield, these senses drag the mind deep into the noise of the physical world. This endless push and pull generates a state of dualistic confusion, what ancient texts call dvandva moha. It's a mental tug-of-war between heat and cold, pleasure and pain, success and failure, leaving the mind completely incapable of standing still. Because of this constant friction, any peace we think we find in the external world is a mirage. The material environment is built on motion and change, making it structurally incapable of providing permanent rest to human consciousness. This brings us to a profound philosophical insight from the current Puri Shankaracharya regarding the hidden, exhausting cost of our worldly happiness. He points out that consuming any material pleasure requires effort. He calls this shrama, the inherent labor of experiencing the world. Even when we are having fun, our senses, our mind, and our intellect are actively working to process that joy, which ultimately drains our energy. To illustrate how draining this is, he poses an extreme scenario. Imagine obtaining the absolute, undisputed wealth of the entire mortal world, or even possessing the cosmic thousand-fold joy of the creator deity, Brahma. Without the ability to disconnect and rest internally, that massive influx of sensory pleasure would eventually drive a soul to madness. We are exhausted because we mistakenly look for rest in the physical domain. And in the physical domain, the mathematical rule is absolute. Where there is an object to be experienced, there is labor required to experience it. If external joy is just exhausting labor, we have to ask where true, effortless rest actually exists. The answer lies in reversing the flow of our awareness, turning the consciousness inward. Indriya Nigraha, or sense control, works through a deliberate, strategic disconnection of the mind from exhausting external stimuli. Ancient texts illustrate this mechanism using the metaphor of the kurma, or the tortoise. When surrounded by a turbulent, dangerous storm, the tortoise doesn't fight the wind or scream at the rain. It simply and smoothly withdraws its limbs into the absolute safety of its shell. A wise person operates exactly the same way. Rather than trying to control the chaotic, dualistic elements of the physical world, they retract their sensory awareness away from the noise, pulling their attention back into the protective center of their own mind. Mastering the conscious art of withdrawal provides the primary defense against worldly burnout. Once this withdrawal is achieved and the mental noise fades, the mind can finally see its own terrain. It exposes the deeply buried historical seeds of ignorance, desire, and aversion that have been driving our exhausting behavior all along. With these seeds exposed, the focused intellect ignites what the Gita calls the fire of true knowledge, or jnanagni. This internal realization acts as an intense, silent wave, instantly reducing those accumulated seeds of compulsion to floating ash. This deep internal purification process clears the fog of the mind and opens the intellect's divine eye, the divya chakshu. This awakened vision allows you to see the clear structural distinction mapped out in this diagram. It separates the kshatra, the temporary, noisy, shifting field of the physical body and the world, from the kshatrajna, the singular, silent, eternal observer seated at the center. Recognizing oneself as the eternal observer stops the cycle of sensory labor, ending the exhaustion of seeking rest where it cannot be found. Now, there is a common, deeply human fear about this process of withdrawal. We often assume that disconnecting from the external world will leave us in a dark, empty void. The reality is exactly the opposite. When consciousness finally unhooks itself from the grueling labor of chasing objects, it discovers an infinite, self-sustaining light waiting inside. This realization forms the deepest secret of the Bhagavad Gita's 5th chapter, a concept beautifully illuminated by the commentaries of Adi Shankaracharya. The text describes a person who has reached this state using 3 precise Sanskrit terms: anta sukho, meaning they find their joy entirely within; antar ramas, meaning they recreate and rest within; and antar jyoti, meaning they are illuminated entirely from within. True vitality emerges when the soul finally rests securely in its own joyful nature, permanently free from the endless labor of external seeking. This is the journey from the exhausting mirage of external duality to the permanent, restful sanctuary of internal non-duality. Think of a perfectly still, ancient tree reflecting on the surface of a glassy, quiet lake at midnight. Anchoring our awareness firmly in this unshakable internal light allows us to experience the world's beauty without the cost of sensory exhaustion. Absolute peace and crystal clear focus remain the fundamental, quiet nature of our own minds, emerging the moment we stop the outward chase.